So welcome everyone to our BVSSH meetup in May. Before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'm acknowledging the Wurundjeri people in Naarm or in Melbourne. That's where I'm based. I think everyone is everywhere. So if you want to put in the chat where you are, that would be great. And I also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So we are privileged to have Mik today. A bit of context for everyone. The BVSSH book club community voted to read the project to product book that Mik wrote in 2018. So a handful of years ago already now. For this quarter's book. So there's a group of us, Mik, that have just recently read it, refreshed ourselves, and have lots of learnings, insights, questions, thinking, and we've got a group of others, I'm sure, that would love to hear. So this is an AMA format, everyone. So please, we'll kind of get started with a question or two that I'm curious about. But please, we will use the chat to get your questions. And if there's a question that you would like to, that you're super passionate about, please put a thumbs up so we prioritize it, but we'll be watching it kind of as we go. And an AMA is an Ask Me Anything. So Mik, I think it's not to hold back. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely not.
Okay. Fantastic. So Mik, maybe then can you please introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of a flavor on who you are, what excites you, what you're passionate about. Just give us a little bit. I know you're in Vancouver, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, like Sergey, looks like I like skiing. Our ski hill closed last weekend, Whistler, which is not far. And then yeah, I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer of PlanView. So working a lot on the value stream management, agile, and digital product development tools, product management tools. We're doing more now, tons of with AI, especially in the last year, and connecting AI and generative AI to the work that we all do on value streams and flow and so on. And then, yeah, 6 years ago, published the project to product book, which has been interesting, which we'll be here to talk about today. You know, lots of interesting learning since then. And yeah, just spent most of my career just studying teams and organizations, but mostly just building software. So, and building software products. So I really enjoy doing that.
Yeah, nice. Sounds like you're a get stuff done kind of person. And I think that resonates with me and with the community. So maybe to kind of get it started, one of the things that there's a handful of things that I really liked about the book, Mik, but the very first thing actually was in how it was introduced. And so the context of a review of the industrial periods and how they've kind of evolved. So in your book, you talk about an installation period, so time when there's an explosion of startups, new business exploring kind of a new technology, then a turning point. So when we've actually mastered that new technology, or for those who haven't, they kind of no longer exist. But then there's also this deployment period when the new technology is kind of everywhere and it's taken over. So it's kind of like we've passed the hype cycle. And it's well and truly kind of BAU, if I can use those words. So I guess I just wonder, and so the age that we're in now, and I talk, a little bit about this when I talk with clients too, but we're in the age of digital, or that's kind of the last one that is in the review that you had at the start of the book. What do you think kind of now, a couple of years on, are we in the age of digital? Where are we at in that? Have you seen kind of the impact of that? What are your perspectives?
Yeah, so I certainly thought we were until recently, and now I think there's another question. So I should just rewind a little bit. That model is from Claude Perez's book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, and it predicts. Well, sorry, it's retroactively predicts. It's a model. How technology, these big world-changing technologies like electricity or oil and mass production really revolutionized economies and markets and how they come in these waves, where if you think back to electricity, the 1880s, when Edison started mass producing light bulbs from Manhattan, there was a lot of change. There was a lot of resistance to change, and people were worried about what the heck electromagnetic fields were and so on. But really, it did transform production. And transforming production first usually involves financial capital. So you have a lot of financial, so banking, investment capital being thrown at organizations that are using these new technologies. And then over time, you reach this turning point where it gets leveraged very broadly. So now, first it was Ford who leveraged electricity in their car plants, because it's a lot better than the steam engine for running a production line. And now it's everywhere. And so these revolutions in Carlo's model, they happen every 50 years. But I think the interesting thing is a lot of the previous ones did have to do with kind of, it was tooling, then it was energy. And then this last one that started happening in the 70s of software and digital was really more around knowledge. And I think we're now at the point where, and the project talks about this, is that those organizations who master software and digital will differentiate themselves, right? The Googles and the Amazons of the world and the Microsofts. But I think now are at a point where generative AI, at least in my view, is as profound as kind of technology step function. So while we're still helping organizations adjust and evolve to understand how to manage software and digital at scale, I actually think we're in the this installation period with a frenzy of financial capital fueling generative AI. And I think potentially what could happen is, because we're no longer needing to build out infrastructure, there's still infrastructure build out for every one of these revolutions. Just the amount of electricity and GPUs it takes right now is obviously concerning for this generative AI revolution. But it could be that they're actually moving a bit faster. And who knows? We'll see. One of my last conversations with the most recent conversations with Carla Perez was around this. Around whether this next evolution is generative AI. We were actually had that conversation 2 or 3 years ago as well, and it looks like it well could be. But no matter what, there's a ton of change, and those teams and organizations that adapt their management systems to embrace that change, I think will move a lot faster in terms of producing value for their markets than the ones that don't. So that's kind of the framing. And bizarrely, it's still how I'm approaching it with what's happening with generative AI. That is that profound, that you will have all this financial capital thrown at it, that you will have what you had back in Detroit in the early 1900s with 300 car startups. You've got all these Gen AI startups right now. But then over time, we learn how to adopt those things. And they really do all require a product operating model to adopt, because fundamentally delivering value through these software and AI value streams is all knowledge work.
So you mentioned the name of a book. Ethan's asking, sorry, just what was the name again? Just so we can catch that as we go to answer Ethan's question.
Yeah, let me send you a link. It's called Technological, I'll grab it actually. This is the book. And it just talks about these technological revolutions.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks,
and
Mik.
I did try to summarize it in Project to Product.
Yeah. And so can I ask,
it's a lot, it goes into a lot of detail.
And so do you think then that what are the risks, or are we ready for the Gen AI explosion? Have we actually done enough on the digital side to then move to more a product-based model or thinking? Or maybe can you give us your view on what the key shift is from project to product?
Yeah, so I think I think a way to look at it is through the Cynefin framework, right? Which is what kind of work we're doing. And of course, we're all sort of doing various kinds of knowledge work, sometimes involving physical systems more, sometimes less. And so in the Cynefin framework, we have like more obvious work, more simple work, which is maybe building a building. And then we have complicated work, and complicated work is like building the world's tallest building. right? Whatever building we call the next Burj Khalifa. You can actually map that out. You can allocate resources. You know how much capital to secure. You can count on the laws of gravity or physics not changing it on you while you're building it. And so it's actually complicated work. And complicated work, you can plan as projects because you can see quite far into the future, right? You can have a multi-year project, these large infrastructure projects and the like, setting up the next large data center, any of those sorts of things. But then you get into complex work. And in my view, all the work that we do is actually complex work. So dealing with organizations, software markets, and so on. Markets change all the time. Consumer sentiment changes. Technology architectures change. So we're dealing with this ever-changing work. And the combination of complexity and the amount of change actually, I think, categorizes the work that we do as complex work. And you can't resource plan out in a Gantt chart complex work for months out. It turns out that faster iterations and sense making as you go, whether those are quarter-long PIs, 2-week-long sprints, month-long startup planning cycles, whatever they are, they work much better for that kind of work. And then, by the way, there's a fourth quadrant in the Cynefin framework, and it's chaotic work, and that was kind of like what we were all doing. You know, when you're actually sense making on an almost daily or weekly basis, like the kinds of things that a lot of us had to do at the start of the pandemic, let's say, to really have very fast sense making because we can see a week ahead or 2 weeks ahead. So, and I'll put a link to the framework in the chat. Oh, they changed the name. That's right. It's not obvious anymore. It's clear. They call it. I guess they all start with C. Yeah. Clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic. So anyway, bottom line is whether it's Gen AI. And by the way, for me, basically the first 6 months of 2023 were in the chaotic mode around Gen AI. Just how quickly we're learning, understanding how it would affect our products, our platform, our customers, and so on. So we were in like full-on sense-making mode. It's still, we're now in the kind of complex part of it, but certainly can't do quarterly long planning cycles around how we're evolving our Gen AI solution, right? It's actually in monthly cycles, whereas a lot of our portfolio does have more of a quarterly cadence. So I think the key thing is also understanding the rate of sense making that you need to do and the rate of learning and adaptation and testing that you need to do in all of this. But I think whether it's Gen AI or it's the age of AI or age of software and digital, the key thing is you need a product operating model and product value streams because it's fast feedback loops no matter what.
And so, Thomas, did you want to pop yourself off mute and ask your question there? Because I think that's a nice one to segue into.
Which one? I'll put 3 up.
The one around team topologies. Go for it.
Oh yeah. What are your thoughts on team topologies in relation to your work on value stream networking? It had a resonance while I was reading it. I was wondering if you'd had the opportunity to reconcile it with your own work.
I had that. So first of all, I like their book. I think it's I've certainly recommended it to people. I've had a few opportunities to interact and to do webinars and so on with Matthew Skelton and Manuel Page. They wrote their book after, so they did a great job, I thought, reconciling it with project to product and the way they refer project to product, and this concept of streamlined teams, right? So I think it provides a very good vocabulary for organizational design. I tend to use a slightly more, in terms of my own teams, I use a slightly more simple vocabulary in terms of having everything as a product and a product value stream. And then we have platform value streams, but those are still products. And we have customer-facing products and we have internal-facing products. So use a slightly simpler model than they do. Of course, theirs is now, I work for the technology company. Theirs, I think, is very helpful for maybe more larger enterprises. But I think no matter what, you could say, what I apply is a subset of that. But the concepts of products and value streams are first class in team topologies. So yeah, I think it's a very useful piece of work and contribution. So I've had conversations with them on this, but I've more closely adapted the kind of AWS, Amazon structure, which is kind of a bit more of a uniform, cascading structure of value streams, each of which map onto 2 pizza teams at the leaves. So I don't have any access to service teams.
Does that answer it, Thomas?
Yeah, it's always the ideas and the thoughts in between that I find most fascinating. It's not a straight answer. It's that complexity, how we navigate the complexity that I find really interesting. So yes, thank you.
And so Penny, did you want to pop yourself off mute? Because you've got a question here around, you hear people refer to project to product all the time and declare their teams as fully transitioned. Did you want to explore that one?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Mick, I work at Commonwealth Bank, and we've sort of are moving to a project to product delivery construct. And sometimes we're in meetings and we get people in risk asking us, so have you fully adopted a product mindset in your space? And the leaders say, yes, we have. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, what's my rubric for that? Like, how do I, what are those defining characteristics of a team of teams to be in a fully product delivery construct or mindset? Maybe it's both.
Yeah, and I think I've had the opportunity to work with CBA and to do some public presentations with CBA as well. I'll actually be there at the end of next week also, in Sydney. I think there's this kind of, but I think what you're talking about, Penny, is that something I see very, very commonly where leadership has shifted to to product. Then you've got these agile teams, and in between, nothing is wired properly, right? So that was, and this is really at it's the value stream level, kind of the definition of value streams between the teams, I think is the crux of this problem. So and I think for the most part, over the last 20 years of team structure, again, team topologies gives you a nomenclature for different kinds of teams, right? Is this an enabling team, and so on. The key thing is, and at the top level, a lot of organizations, a lot of banks have embraced this product operating model, but where I think the biggest challenge and opportunity is really how you connect the products, including the platform products, to the way that the teams work. And oftentimes, because in the end, we want those same kind of principles that work for teams, such as we want teams to have autonomy and a clear scope and minimize dependencies. Well, we want the team of teams level to do that as well. And then if you're a very large organization, like the size of CBA, you might actually have one or two more layers in that. And I think there's some of these interesting challenges where a lot of organizations thought, let's say, taking the Spotify model of squads and crews would somehow address this. And it kind of helps, like team topologies kind of helps, but until you actually have, in my view, a management system where you can basically visualize and measure and plan around each of those cascading team levels, and they're all independent, right? Like this is kind of the beauty. This is the lifeline. This is what it's been in a lot. Like Amazon, it's not just Amazon. A lot of technology companies do the same thing, but they just have this very clear structure of here's the 2 pizza teams, here's the team of teams value streams, here's the nested value stream, and it's just this clean structure all the way to the top with the right kinds of leadership at each level, right? So for example, if it's a team or a value stream building a platform that's composed of multiple teams, well, chances are you need a very for platform value streams, you need a distinguished engineer and an engineering manager, and maybe someone with an operational background who are really teaming around that. If it's something more business centric, you need someone who's more of a traditional product management role, or very close to the business, or actually embedding the business and matrixing things in properly. So I think the key thing is to actually formalize those value streams, so you know what they are. Like what are the teams? What are the teams of teams? And kind of forget about the applications, right? Like, because every one of these large organizations has way more applications than they have teams, and it's kind of working backwards from the application doesn't work. You want to work backwards from the value you're delivering to the market, right, which is the product value streams, like certain ones, and then make sure that there's a clear mapping on, because in the end, value streams in digital are composed of people, right? It's people doing all the work. So it's how you've actually composed and nested these value streams that's so key, and then making sure that you have a way of reviewing and evolving them, right? You'll never end up, especially coming from more of a project-oriented way of working, where the intake for entire, crews, let's say, or larger teams was project work that they were taking in versus capacity that they had that you were planning and prioritizing. So I think the key thing is just making sure that you've actually got a system that lets at every level, you're able to review that particular product value streams, roadmap, its plan, whether you're doing PI planning or any other, whatever increments you're planning on, its flow metrics, and then you have an actual formalized management process around that, where, for example, for us, at the top level, it starts with a quarterly product review, so QPR, which is connected up to our quarterly business reviews, because in the end, these value streams at the top level need to be aligned to what you're delivering as a business. And then at that next level down, there's kind of monthly and right down to sprint planning. And to make it as simple as possible, right? And to make sure that it's aligned to some kind of business metrics, where in our case, a lot of organizations, it's objectives and key results. It's how we make sure that we're actually aligning the activities and work being done to some kind of measurable business outcomes. So long-winded answer, but I think that the key thing is to have these kind of product and value management practices at each level, right down to the agile teams, and to make sure you've got clear ownership and a clear management system and review process for each.
Yeah, so Maria, I think Penny also got one more question. I'm just wondering whether, Penny, are you happy to ask this question as well? Like where you talk about the tools being configured and the connecting the tool chains together to see the flow of the value across. Do you want to be specific and ask the question to Mik, please?
Sure. So, and just following on from your question, Mik, I think our context then is that we possibly haven't really mapped the true value stream. There's whole of the visibility in our value stream. So what I'm seeing at the moment, I think you described in your book that you could see end-to-end flow of flow items, regardless if they were transversing across different tool sets. So maybe a piece of work would come in via ServiceNow, and then it would make its way to delivery, where it was actually getting the work was being managed in Jira, and that you could see that end-to-end connectivity of the flow item when it was requested, all the way through to delivery through release management systems as well. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. We don't seem to have that where we are at the moment. Like, we are only measuring flow within one system, so within Jira. And so I was trying to think technically, how would that actually work? You'd have to have some sort of technical keying across the tool chain. And I wasn't quite sure if I'd understood that correctly, but is that what you were describing? Was that you could actually see a flow item as it traversed across the tool chain? And how would that work?
You understand it perfectly. So yeah. So I think the key thing is we need to layer above, and that's the goal of the flow framework, is to provide a way of thinking about that layer above the tools, because the tools evolve, right? And a lot of organizations, and by the way, what happens a lot is organizations have figured out how to do some measurements in whatever their primary agile tool is, which is most commonly, I think it would be Jira. In some cases, it'll be Azure DevOps. In some cases, it'll be GitLab. Some organizations more purely with GitHub now. But then, of course, a lot of the intake is the value stream is much broader than that. Actually, it's in terms of when we analyze the end-to-end flow time, the smallest part of it is actually in the agile team, because the bottlenecks tend to be upstream and downstream of that. And the way that work is flowing from a customer into ServiceNow and through incidents and changes and so on. So the key thing is, and like you said, we do need to be able to see that flow. They do need to be keyed somehow, to your point, right? So I think the key thing is organizations need a solution for that. And what I've been building with my teams for many years now is approaches for that. So we actually do have, and we can go into closer to how you can adopt this, because we are working closely with CBA. Basically synchronize items across these tools, so all the way from ideation to basically agile to this kind of service management, DevOps, release management layers, where all of those things are synchronized. So they've got one identity, and then just visualize the flow of those. So, and by the way, the core issue of this is that at scale, organizations end up using different tools, right? Jira Service Desk exists, but it's not commonly used because ServiceNow has the majority, is the market leader there, right? A lot of our organizations now who are more on the digital side, they're using ServiceNow and Service Cloud and so on. So the key thing is whatever the tools are today and tomorrow, that you can actually trace this thread of flow across the value stream, so you understand where is it getting stuck. And technically, that's very feasible. So,
and I think that comes to creating a bit of a connected and integrated ecosystem, because we need finance, we need HR, we need who's in your teams, we need what are the value streams, what are the initiatives, how are we releasing them, what are the incidents? Like it's a holistic system here that we need to be thinking about and how we connect it.
Yeah, just a couple of things to add.
I think the key thing is that the technology is there, right? Your value streams are there, your teams are there. All this stuff can be done tomorrow. You can connect up to finance, right? Now, some things are trickier. If you've got a project operating model for how you fund everything and a product operating model for delivery, there's a trickier mapping, but that's doable as well. Organizations are doing that too. So, sorry, I interrupted someone.
No, sorry, Mik. I mean, I second it because I have the first-hand experience working with the tool, and I have configured actually the Jira and also ServiceNow, and I've seen like how the things can flow across it. So that's what I want to add to that, like because you are doing a different activity on the flow item at different stages in your SDLC if you're a digital product value stream. So. Because just using Jira is giving you only one perspective of that flow item within that your activity planning or activity execution, but you are also using other tools for testing and deployment, and also ideation, creation, release, and operation, right? So you need to connect the entire flow item, the flow item, all the dots connected, so you can see the end-to-end flow of value. Yeah, sorry, Maria, the next question. That's good.
Exactly, and just don't want to make this overly commercial, but we were partnering with Sooner Safer Happier for the PlanView suite of tools that do this. So yeah, so just please get in touch with the Sooner Safer Happier team. So
before we go into tooling, because I know we could spend the whole rest of the time talking about that, there's actually a question here, Mik, that came up earlier from Tony. Did you want to ask it around the product orientation and how do you actually set that up? Reporting lines, value streams, go for it.
Yeah, Mik, some people on the call may have no control over structure, that is, reporting lines, etc. And so are often faced with needing to deal with an organization that has either hard line reporting of teams into a single leader, or matrix and virtual teams that are assembled around products. And really what I wanted to hear was, what are your thoughts on the pros and cons? In other words, does it impede or not impede you if you've got a virtual or matrixed environment or a blend thereof, or is it better to try and orient your people into a hard line structure around a product?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I gave a talk on this. It's an Idea Revolution library just on this one topic called modularizing the messy matrix. And I think my view on this, but really, and I do have a couple of this is such a, I think, key topic, right? Gene's new book, Wiring to Win Organization, touches on this a bunch as well. My view in terms of my experience on this is you should try the hard line until you can't, basically, and then you matrix. So I did make and again, going back to that example of, this is pretty well documented in the book, Working Backwards on AWS, by Jeff Barr. And they actually tried to hardline everything. So 2 pizza teams hardlined in this perfectly cascaded structure with 7 layers of general managers, which really were those were their nested value streams, right? They call them, I think and the names change, but it's value streams, programs, whatever you call them. And the challenge is that you do end up the leaders of those, because if you actually do manage to hardline this completely, that's a single threaded owner structure. So you basically have the value stream ownership as one person, and they have all the people needed to deliver on that value stream reporting into them. So at the lowest level, it's the engineers. Let's say if you build it, you run it, it's the engineers, it's as well as the people operating the software, some design and so on, a product manager and such, right? And they have one leader, and then that leader has multiple value streams of those people, and there's one leader, and so on. And that actually is generally how some of these large organizations are structured. The challenge is, and this is what AWS and Amazon noticed as well, it is very hard in some cases to find those unicorns that can do all that leadership. Not to mention, in some cases like UX, the UX people don't always want to report to an engineering manager. And data scientists, I know my data scientists don't always want to report to people with an operations background and so on. So I actually personally I moved away 3 years ago from a structure where it's all completely hardlined to a common ones, then a 2-in-the-box structure. But the neat thing with a 2-in-the-box structure is you actually have this really nice architecture of your value streams, and then you deal with, now we have teams in many more regions, for example, right? So I actually try to make sure the structure works. You keep that 2-in-the-box structure across regions, but you've got product and engineering leaders on each value stream, and they have teams or teams of teams. And even though there's a matrix component to it, because the performance review for the product manager is done by their product leader, and engineering manager by their engineering leader, you still retain those benefits. So that too, sometimes Shopify, it's a 3-in-the-box structure. That can be effective as well. But I think the key thing is to keep this nesting and the structure consistent, even where you're matrixing.
And so just to be clear, Mik, your 2-in-the-box is a product or customer value person, and then the technology, like a technical, something who's worried about the systems. Is that right?
That's right. So my 2-in-the-box structure for external facing products is always, it's a product leader and an engineering leader.
Yeah.
And then in the case of the most technical value streams, like just a data pipeline, let's say our data mesh, we actually will have it'll be a single threaded owner who's just an engineering leader. But in some cases, if it's a internal platform that has APIs that are consumed by many of our teams, or some cases outside, we actually will put a more technical product manager in with that engineering leader, and back to 2-in-the-box.
And so if I can add a question actually on there, where do you see the role of delivery in that? And if we've got kind of people that are focused on product vision, strategy, prioritization, truly understanding the customer, market, competitive trends, pressures, etc. And then the technical people worrying about the systems, their health, their strategy, their upgrade. What about delivery? Where does delivery fit?
Yeah, so, and this will just depend between enterprises and technology organizations, or really the kind of technology organization it is. So my preferred, but its structure is actually, so for example, we don't have separate architects. It's just staff engineers who work with their value streams. And now, of course, they do architecture, but the architecture is the joint responsibility. In that case, you basically have more or less a 3-in-a-box at that level. And so I actually have an architect reporting to me, but he's responsible for the architecture across those value streams, along with my product, the pairings of my product and engineering VPs and GVPs. So so again, it's by providing autonomy and minimizing dependencies on these value streams, it means you have to embed all the talent that you need in there. So to me, what that means is all operational responsibility is actually on the value stream as well. So that means the majority I still have a couple laggards, but the majority of my values, the value streams that I'm responsible for, are all you build it, you run it, because I want them to all have operational responsibility and have a very small ops kind of SRE platform engineering team in the end, right? So we've moved beyond kind of the traditional DevOps approaches to more platform engineering. And that works very nicely. Now, that's not always the reality. Like, you will have kind of delivery and operations sometimes centralized elsewhere. But then I think the key thing is, if that's the case, to still replicate as much of that kind of autonomy and clean value stream structure as possible, which, for example, means that those people should be planning and reviewing and meeting together. So just to give you an example of the two in the box or the end of the box structure, when we're doing a quarterly product review, so my leaders are presenting to our CEO their top level value streams. Both of the two in the box are always there. If we're having it really, some amazing customer discussions, it's not, you don't just put the product engineering there, product leader there who's used to the external discussion, you put the engineering there as well. So now, of course, to your point, Maria, the product person spends way more time thinking about competitive and design and market stuff than the engineering leader thinks a lot more about technology. But really, it's about having them work together and having a management system that has them working together. An answer for me is, if they haven't worked together until it's time to prepare the monthly, quarterly review, right? That's something's been wrong there, and it comes out very quickly on those reviews, though.
And it does. And so I think the thing that I see in some organizations is because that muscle on the product side isn't quite there yet, and we're needing to bridge and bring kind of product and customer and tech together. And because the product muscle isn't strong, often the delivery muscle isn't strong either. So often I see that we need a trio where delivery is kind of up at the front as well, to then help make sure that we got the tension on helping to manage the flow of work through the system and help alleviate any blockers, etc. Because we're strengthening the product customer muscle. We still need to deliver, so someone needs to be accountable for that. And then technology needs to play a role.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
what I see.
In those cases, it is a trio. It's three in the box. Yeah.
So Tony, did that answer the question?
Yes, it did largely. I could spend all day deep diving into this one, so I'm going to hand it over to someone else.
Okay, well, we might then go to Sergey. So Sergey, you had a question earlier on in the chat, but I think it's a good segue between communications between technical and business teams in the playing field. So I think what Mik talked about was what we're all aspiring to get to, but the reality on the ground today is largely not that in a lot of cases. So did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Maria. So my question is, Mik, what are your thoughts on communication between technical teams and business teams in the playing field? And how do you think project to product philosophy can improve this communication to drive value?
Well, yeah, so I kind of view it as very similar to that last discussion point. So that they should be working as one team, right? So there's two, to oversimplify it, either the business team is throwing work over the fence to the technical teams, or they're working together, right? And so the question for me becomes, how often and how do they need to work together? And so when we see organizations implement a product operating model, for example, like often a failure we see is if you're going to invite senior business leaders to every sprint demo, there's a good chance they're not attending. That's not, maybe they're like excited for a while and they start attending, but then they're not attending. But for a monthly and quarterly product value stream review, they better be attending, and they better have discussed that, and they better have set their flow distribution to understand, so that both of them need to come together to determine how much work for this next iteration, this next PI is going to go into technical debt versus feature work, right? Versus risk and defect work. So I think, again, having a system that I want to say incentivizes, but fundamentally kind of forces that collaboration to happen and the decision-making to happen, so that you're being proactive about those decisions rather than just wondering why things went sideways, is key. And I think, again, that structure and that cadence is what enables this. And just up-leveling it, and this is, again, the problems. I think what happens a lot is people expect this stuff to come out naturally from Agile teams because it is all part of Agile and lean thinking, but that's just too fine-grained. too low a level of detail often for the business people who need to be closely engaged. That's why engaging them at that team of teams level, at the value stream level, I think is so effective, and making sure they're part of that system. Making sure, for example, if they're, if you take away kind of projects and requirements from them, like what are you replacing them with? Because in the end, that's how you're engaging them in. And so for us, that's really all around roadmaps and OKRs, right? There needs to be some mechanism that helps that value stream focus on the outcomes and which is captured in OKRs, and whatever activities will drive those outcomes, which is captured in our roadmaps, right? So and then the trade-offs that you make in support of that. So you're really working as one team on that value stream in support of those trade-offs. So I think I think because what happens a lot, is communication and culture get blamed, but in the end, it's the management system needs to be there. You can't just expect people to be up to speed on the current state of the technical debt in this value stream unless you've got a system for reviewing that and measuring it.
And so, Sergey, one of the questions actually that comes to my mind from your question and Mik, from what you're talking about is how do we actually prioritize tech debt? Like, how do we, so raising it and showing the fact that it's there and the impact that it's having, I think is one thing, but how do we, and based on your experience, Mik, like what are some ninja moves or some unlock moments to actually get tech debt to be prioritized to the top of the list? Because it's often not. Yeah.
So again, it's just, you make a system. Our roadmaps are all just have 4 sections, which is features, defects, risks, and debt. That stuff is all sitting there. And in the end, I think it has to be tied to a business outcome. So we have to have an OKR for it. And then when you're doing your review, monthly or quarterly, you say, are we taking on this tech debt to get to that outcome, where that outcome might be faster velocity, it might be moving off a system that's less secure, it might be adopting a new cloud service or an LLM in place of some old model that you're using or some old data that you're using. And then again, reviewing that, did we achieve that? Are we behind it? So I think the ninja move is that all tech debt work is tied to an OKR that's meaningful to the business, or unless you've got kind of an organization that's very used to doing tech debt work because they realize that the payoffs happen, it's not going to get prioritized. So
yeah, thanks. And Sergey, did that answer your question?
Yep, very much. Thank you. I do think that people need to be on one team from business and development. Maybe there's like DevOps has this idea of team bringing like developers and operation teams together and testers. Maybe we need to involve business people in the bottom teams, not maybe on teams level, but whichever level it is, I think it should be somewhere. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, and some people call this biz DevOps, and then people start calling biz DevSecOps, and you just keep adding short words into the middle of it. That's why I just call it value streams. And you need all the people who need to deliver value on those value streams, right? Sometimes you need a data scientist, sometimes you won't, and so on.
Yeah, I think that keeps it simpler. Thank you, Sergey. So before we move into Richard's question on metrics, maybe just a one to kind of open it up, Mik. So a lot of the book in Project to Product talks about what should we be measuring in order to then understand kind of the health of the system. Did you maybe just want to give an overview on what some of the key metrics and things that you think that organizations should consider? And then we'll go to Richard's question.
Yeah, sure. So for like one of the main things I was trying to get across in Project Products, we can't measure just things that's easy, which is like how quickly user stories are closed in Jira, what the burn down chart is. We need to measure end to end. So we need to measure the value stream across systems. And so we just need to have simple metrics for that. So flow time is the end to end time, whereas what you see in Jira is typically the cycle time, like how long it took to get a portion of the work done rather than how long it took from the point of view of when work started and work was delivered to a customer. So it's just those flow metrics: flow time, flow velocity, just how much was done, flow efficiency, which was the ratio of wait to work states, and flow load, which is a work in progress metric, and then flow distribution, which is this distribution of features, defects, risks, and debts, which is really the tool that we use to to prioritize tech debt work or to prioritize risk work, like security work, right? Because that's another thing that can get you if not being proactive about it, but no one's proactive about it when they feel like they're way behind on the roadmaps for delivering things to customers and the payoff's not clear. So the key thing is measure each value stream of these flow metrics, connect it to some kind of business outcomes, like through OKRs, and then make sure that, again, this is kind of about leveling, like stepping up a level of granularity above the team. So the team is great working on their backlogs and their Kanban boards, but really the level above them should be a roadmap, right? So every value stream has to have a very clear roadmap. And then we need to understand, are we actually, are some roadmap items not getting completed quickly enough, even though all these user stories are getting completed and so on. So just having that value stream level management system and measuring OKRs, flow metrics, and roadmaps.
Did you want to ask your question, Richard? Because I think it's a good follow-on.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. And I suspect the answer might include OKRs, actually, just listening to what Mik's just been saying. But in my experience, actually defining the endpoint to the right is often more difficult, or one of the most difficult aspects of this. And particularly in our organization, we're often talking about flow in terms of delivery to customer, shipping product. It's your typical kind of feature factory kind of anti-pattern where I'm actually measuring success in terms of finishing something and putting it in the hands of the customer, as opposed to measuring the impact, benefit, value of that thing that we just shipped.
Yeah, and so I think the good starting point for that is because it's obviously easier to measure activity than outcome, right? At the same rate, keep in mind the flow metrics like flow velocity, they also measure activity. It's just end-to-end activity rather than just activity in a segment of the value stream. So I think that the key thing is for every value stream, you need, start at least with one business outcome. Because in the end, what should happen is you need to measure the activities, so what work is being done, and really the output of that value stream, the number of features delivered, the amount of tech debt resolved, and then see how much that moves the needle on the outcome, right? And it's easier for external products where you've got active users, revenue, market share. But same thing, we measure for the internal platforms and products. It's the same thing. They need to have a roadmap. They need to have an OKR. So I don't know, let's say the multi-agent architecture of our PlanView Copilot, the kind of the brains that sits above the LLM, large language models that we use. That's measured by the number of basic tokens that it's processing and invocations it's processing, right? Now, of course, that has to correlate to the external product, which is that we can count the number of conversations that people are having with their Copilot, the number of actions that people are invoking with it. So it's work, but starting by just making every value stream should have some kind of outcome metric, even if it's an API. Even if it's a data pipeline or a data mesh or something of that sort.
And is that the metric you think that the thing that we're measuring, if we were to start somewhere, that should be the place to start?
Well, I would say, so it's, I guess to start, let's say you've got, I don't know, a value stream that's got 4 agile teams on it. I would not worry so much about having like 5 OKRs for each agile team. I'd say on that value stream composed of those 5 agile teams, let's make sure they have an objective for this quarter, this PI, this iteration, and that objective is measurable by one or more numbers in terms of what their delivery is going to help drive. And those numbers, ideally, they're closer to financial metrics, but for a lot of internal platform API and infrastructure work, they won't be, right? The metric might be just the reduced number of outages, or other reduction in flow time is when we measure a ton. That we make it, that the platform engineering teams make it easier for the teams that they're supporting to deliver features. So just some number.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be a difficult area because I think it reflects that even high performing or legacy kind of organizations with kind of good project skills often find it difficult to actually measure value and benefit. It's always been the most difficult thing to measure.
But this is not easy, right? Because it's situational, and you have to get people to decide, and that's why however many there are in the box, they have to decide. Like this is for this, whatever the time box is, this is what we're measuring as the outcome. And in some cases, and of course, what's hard to decide is oftentimes you'll have a leading and lagging indicators for that, right? Like revenue, that's a lagging indicator of anything the teams are building, right? So it's probably, you want to measure that, but that'll be like, well, that's actually what we treat as one of our KPI, because for each value stream, we actually have a set of KPIs in addition to OKRs. Like, so we measure it like, and if we want to improve one of them significantly, we stick it into our OKRs. So if we want to improve the net promoter score, or if we want to improve the employee happiness of the value stream, those are all measured for every single one of them. But every quarter, every year, we look at the ones that we really want to drive improvement on, and those become our OKRs. And Penny, yes, sorry, I've not really been paying attention to the chat. That is the ISS. So yeah, I've got something in common with your son. So the Lego ISS.
I think that's a good segue, maybe, Greg, to your question, because you're talking about how might we then quantify that? Did you want to go for and ask your question?
Sure, thanks. So my question is more around kind of the project versus project. So if you go back and think about like the Cinefin, the different quadrants, the projects that we work on are primarily all internal facing. So you have a really well-known customer segment. There's not ambiguity around what's going on in the market. And so our organization is throwing around, oh, we need to shift to having product teams so we can do all of this research. And it's more about just uncovering requirements. So we're throwing around product mode, much in the same way that I just bought a new washing machine and it has a Gen AI sticker on it, but it's a washing machine. So in that way, does it make sense to still stand up product teams when we know all of these things are well known, and it's a lot of technology replatforming, less about discovering what's in the best interest of the customer when that's already clearly defined?
So my answer to that will actually be, so sort of doing it just ceremoniously, sticking a product label on a team that's going to change every 3 weeks, obviously it's counterproductive, but for project-based work like consulting, like some government projects, those sort of federal work, those sorts of things, I still think just the same way as it makes sense to have stable teams, right? We know those work better than people between teams every 3 weeks. It makes sense to establish these product value streams, right? Where for that value stream, you will have a team that's doing just experimentation or MVPs or something. And really that kind of research mode is part of their charter, but they're a stable team. Like they get very good at that, right? Whereas you'll have another team that maybe is able to take on multiple projects, but they're still working as, if they need to, you've got a third team that's maybe needs to build out some foundational technologies that are shared between projects that you're doing for clients or something else. So I absolutely think it applies even when the funding model or the work intake is projects, because it has you determine which things are platforms that will support multiple teams working on various projects. And then, in the end, so you're just able to optimize around effective team structures. So.
Can I maybe ask an extension one, Mik? So based on your kind of hands-on keyboard software engineering experience, there's a question I think out there that exists quite a bit around how might we deliver like a core tech modernization upgrade uplift program that typically to get the whole thing done from beginning to end takes multiple years. Can we do that in a different way or a better way, or is that what's your view on that?
Yeah, my view on that, I've seen many of those and participated in quite a few. It's yes, and you do it with a product model and a roadmap, right? Because what will often happen here, like the ways I very often see the more project plan mindset will just look at, it'll be less of a discussion, kind of technology and connecting technology and business. So if it's overly project managed, I see it, I will usually see it as a lift and shift, right? And then things don't really get better and so on. Whereas if you actually take a product mindset to it, you will look at, okay, let's look at the roadmap. Let's look at which are the kind of functionality we move, which is what do we re-implement on some cloud services that are provided to us, and which parts, how do we actually get ahead? Like which parts of the tech debt do we resolve? Which parts do we carry forward? Whereas which parts are so problematic, well, we should just re-implement those things. And so I think for these long modernizations, it's a super useful model, even though, of course, there is a project plan behind it because it's a multi-year modernization. I think taking a roadmap approach to that can really help make sure you're pivoting accordingly. Right. So
yeah. Beautiful. And so I'm going to squeeze one last question in because it's a great one to end on leadership. So Daryl, did you want to ask your question?
Sure, yes. Apologies for the sound of my voice. I've got a cold. But Mik, I heard a great term the other day that I hadn't heard before. So in the past, I've heard people describe that area that you were talking about, like the 7 layers of GMs between the agile teams and the senior leadership team. I've heard the term used before of the frozen middle and trying to deal with them and so on. And I've always found it a bit problematic. And I heard this great term the other day, which was talking about the excuse me, I can't even say it. The
magic middle.
The magic middle, yeah, because when you unlock them and you get that connection from execution to strategy, that's where the magic happens. And I just thought that was such a beautiful term, and I thought I'd ask you what you think of that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, right? It's in the end, it's about creating an effective team structure, collaboration model, and organizational wiring for that layer, right? That's what unlocks all the value. The value is people generally tend to structure their teams and bet on the right technology stacks and so on. I think the entire and leadership teams, as we heard Penny say earlier, like oftentimes there's kind of clear understanding of what needs to be done above. That whole magic is in the middle. So I think it's a great thing to call it, and it's I think what we all need to focus on is creating and evolving. Like, is that structure in the middle? I look at it in terms of my role. Every single quarter, we review, should we change anything? We don't do it annually, and we do New York's annually and so on, but really evolving it every quarter, looking, should we move this team? Are we missing should we change the leadership structure? Have we created too many dependencies between 2 value streams? Do we need a platform service here? I think the architecture and wiring of that middle is as important as your software architecture, oftentimes more, because it actually ends up defining your software architecture. So yeah, absolutely, magic middle.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daryl. Great one to end on. And I've got a new term now, magic middle. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. Thank you, Mik, for dialing in from the other side of the world, from my home country. It was great to have ask you anything, no holds bar, your opinion, perspectives, insights. So very thankful for your time today and for everyone and their questions.